The first starships began arriving over Valoria before dawn, descending through the violet upper atmosphere like silver needles drawn toward the imperial capital. From the western balcony of the palace, Princess Lyra watched them break through the cloud layer one by one, their hulls flashing beneath the light of 3 pale moons. Each vessel carried a noble house, a military dynasty, or a prince whose family controlled enough planets to make modesty seem like a medical condition. Lyra rested her hands against the cold crystal railing and tried not to count them. She reached 37 before deciding that counting potential husbands was a deeply unpleasant way to begin the morning. Behind her, a wardrobe drone hovered with a ceremonial gown draped over its mechanical arms. "Your Highness," it said for the 5th time, "your pulse remains elevated." "I noticed," Lyra whispered. The drone rotated its polished head. "Would you like a sedative? Would it last until next year?" That dosage would be legally classified as assassination. Lyra almost smiled, but the expression vanished when another ship entered the atmosphere, this one surrounded by escort fighters bearing the gold crest of House Tarev. Prince Kalen, according to the court archives, had won 12 duels, conquered 2 moons, and once ordered a sculptor imprisoned because a statue made his chin look insufficiently heroic. He was considered an excellent match. The thought made Lyra's long, pointed ears lower slightly beneath her golden hair. By midday, the Hall of Constellations had filled with representatives from across the Empire. Holographic banners floated between towering columns of white alloy, displaying the symbols of 100 worlds. Noblemen wore ceremonial armor polished bright enough to blind nearby servants. Ambassadors whispered behind jeweled breathing masks. Above them, the glass ceiling revealed the slow passage of orbital defense rings and the enormous shadow of the Imperial flagship. Lyra sat beside her 2 older sisters beneath the throne platform, feeling as though the entire galaxy had gathered for the purpose of noticing that she did not know what to do with her hands. Her eldest sister, Seraphine, sat perfectly straight and looked capable of declaring war with a raised eyebrow. Her second sister, Melis, smiled warmly at every visitor, and had already received 3 formal alliance offers before the opening speech ended. Lyra received a tray of water from a nervous servant, who nearly dropped it when she thanked him. At the far end of the hall stood the human military delegation. Humans were still considered unusual within the Empire, partly because they had joined only 12 years earlier, and partly because they treated dangerous situations as opportunities to invent jokes. Among them was Sergeant Ethan Vale, wearing a dark blue uniform with no jewels, no ceremonial cape, and no family crest beyond a small patch bearing the emblem of Earth. He looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Stop pulling at your collar," whispered Lieutenant Harris beside him. "I can't breathe." "That is because it is fastened. A terrible design flaw." Ethan glanced toward the throne, then at the crowd of jeweled nobles. "How many of these men have personally conquered moons?" 7, according to the program. "And how many have personally washed their own socks?" Harris studied the room. "Possibly none." "Then I remain unimpressed." A trumpet-like vibration rolled through the hall as the Emperor rose. The ancient choosing ceremony began with the eldest princess as tradition demanded. Suitors stepped forward, announced bloodlines, military victories, trade networks, and other achievements no one had requested. Seraphine accepted a strategic bond with the heir of a border system. Melis chose a diplomat from the ocean worlds of Tyrion. Applause echoed beneath the glass ceiling. Then Lyra's name was spoken. The hall changed. It was not silence exactly, but something thinner and crueler. Whispers hidden beneath polite music, glances quickly withdrawn, smiles that did not reach the eyes. Lyra stood. Her knees felt weak, though the palace floor remained perfectly steady beneath her. The first suitor approached, bowed, and requested permission to select another royal alliance. The second claimed his people required a more publicly expressive partner. The third praised Lyra's beauty before explaining that beauty alone could not strengthen a dynasty. By the 6th rejection, she no longer looked toward the speaker. By the 9th, she focused on a tiny maintenance drone cleaning dust from the base of a pillar. It worked with great concentration and seemed, at that moment, the most honorable creature in the room. Ethan's expression hardened, Is this part of the ceremony? He whispered. Harris shifted uneasily. Apparently. They parade her in front of everyone and take turns insulting her? Diplomatically. Ah, the civilized version. On the throne, the emperor's face remained unreadable, but his fingers tightened around the armrest. Another noble stepped forward, glanced at Lyra, and declined before the herald had finished announcing his name. Soft laughter moved through the crowd. Lyra heard it. Her ears lowered further, and for one terrible instant she wished the glass ceiling would fail and allow the vacuum of space to swallow the hall. Instead, she sat down slowly, folded her hands in her lap, and endured the next name. Across the chamber, Ethan stopped pulling at his collar. He was no longer bored. He was watching her. The 10th suitor did not even bother to approach Lyra. Lord Veridon of the Heliox systems remained beside his family banner, placed one hand over his jeweled chest, and announced that his house required a princess whose temperament could inspire confidence among the outer colonies. The words were polished, but their meaning was plain enough. Too timid, too quiet, too weak. Lyra stared at the luminous patterns moving beneath the transparent floor. Far below the hall, rivers of blue energy flowed through the palace reactors, feeding power into the capital's shield grid. She imagined stepping through the glass and becoming part of that silent current, invisible to every person above. His temperament inspires me to leave, Ethan murmured from across the chamber. Harris coughed to hide a laugh. Unfortunately, the translator orb hovering above them amplified the cough and converted it into the ceremonial dialect as, "The human officer expresses aggressive respiratory agreement." Several nobles turned. Ethan looked up at the machine. "You are not helping." The orb pulsed cheerfully. Gratitude acknowledged. The next candidate was Prince Kalen, whose golden armor had been engineered to project a subtle halo around his shoulders. He crossed the hall with the measured confidence of a man who had rehearsed walking in front of mirrors. When he stopped before Lyra, she forced herself to raise her eyes. His smile was flawless and empty. "Princess," he said, "your grace is known across the empire." A few guests leaned forward. Kalen paused long enough to make the moment feel almost merciful. However, House Tarev requires a royal partner capable of commanding public devotion. I fear your preference for silence would be misunderstood by our citizens. Lyra's fingers tightened against one another. "I understand," she whispered. Kalen tilted his head. "I beg your pardon?" Her voice had been too quiet for the hall's acoustic field. The translation system projected a message above her in glowing letters, "Audio below ceremonial threshold." A ripple of amusement moved through the audience. Kalen's smile widened by a fraction. "As I said," he concluded, turning away. Ethan took one step forward before Harris caught his sleeve. "Do not start an interstellar incident." "I wasn't going to. You have the face." "What face?" "The one you wore before throwing a governor into a fountain." He was on fire. He was insulting Earth. Two emergencies can happen at once. At the throne, Emperor Aldrin signaled for the ceremony to continue, though the lines around his eyes had deepened. He had ruled 73 worlds, survived assassination attempts, rebellions, and a plague carried by sentient dust. Yet he could not stop an ancient tradition without appearing to favor one daughter over the laws binding the crown. That was what the imperial advisors would say. Tradition was often cruelty preserved beneath expensive language. Behind the emperor stood Chancellor Vaylor, tall and narrow, his silver robes threaded with data filaments. He watched each rejection without discomfort. Once, when Lyra lowered her head, Ethan saw the Chancellor exchange a brief glance with an admiral near the eastern columns. It lasted less than a second, but soldiers learned to notice the things powerful people hoped no one saw. "Who is the Silver Scarecrow?" Ethan asked. "Chancellor Vaylor," Harris replied. "Controls half the court. He looks pleased. He always looks like that. Then someone should check whether he feeds on disappointment." One by one, the names continued. A merchant heir feared Lyra lacked political ambition. A planetary duke worried that her nervousness might weaken trade negotiations. A warlord from the Crass Dominion declared that his species considered prolonged silence an omen of disease. The palace physicians quietly objected, but by then no one listened. Lyra stood beneath the light of 100 holographic stars while strangers described her as a deficiency. Her sisters watched with helpless anger. Milas reached for her hand, but protocol required the chosen princesses to remain seated beside their new partners. Even affection had rules in the imperial court. When the 14th suitor declined, the maintenance drone Lyra had been watching bumped into the pillar and spun helplessly in a circle. Its tiny cleaning arms waved as it attempted to correct itself. Despite everything, a faint laugh escaped her. The sound was so soft that only the nearest attendants heard it. One servant smiled. Ethan saw that too. For a moment, Lyra did not look like a failed political asset. She looked young, exhausted, and painfully alone. Then the final name was called. Duke Auras stepped forward, bowed to the Emperor, and requested withdrawal from consideration. The herald's voice echoed through the chamber. No further registered candidates remain. Silence settled beneath the glass ceiling. Outside, the Imperial flagship moved across the stars, its shadow passing over the hall like an approaching storm. Chancellor Vaylor leaned toward the Emperor and whispered something. Aldrin's jaw tightened. Lyra rose because tradition demanded that the unchosen royal member stand when the ceremony closed. Her face remained composed, but the tips of her long ears trembled. Ethan looked at Harris. Registered candidates? Harris followed his gaze and immediately understood. No. I haven't asked anything yet. You are a human soldier with no noble title, no planetary holdings, and exactly 14 credits in your account. 15. The vending machine refunded you. Then destiny has provided funding. Harris closed his eyes. Ethan. Before the herald could speak the closing words, the human stepped out from the delegation. His boots struck the transparent floor once, then again, each sound carrying farther than it should have. The nobles turned. The Emperor looked down. Lyra slowly lifted her head. Chancellor Vaylor's pleased expression vanished. Ethan walked toward the center of the hall, tugged once at the collar he hated, and raised his hand. I believe, he said, you missed someone. For several seconds, no one in the Hall of Constellations seemed capable of understanding what Ethan had said. The words hung beneath the glass ceiling, while holographic stars continued drifting through the air with perfect indifference. A tiny artificial comet passed between two silent nobles, crossed the chamber, and vanished into a projection of the Perseid Gate. Then Prince Kalen laughed. The sound was sharp enough to give the rest of the court permission to join him. Laughter spread through the hall in polished waves, restrained at first, then louder when Ethan continued walking toward the throne as though he had not noticed. Lyra watched him approach with wide eyes. His uniform carried no gems, no ceremonial medals, and no luminous cape programmed to respond dramatically to movement. One sleeve was slightly creased. Compared with the assembled heirs of planetary dynasties, he looked almost offensively ordinary. Sergeant Ethan Vale, the herald said after consulting the data tablet in his hands, you are not listed among the candidates. That explains why you didn't call my name. The herald blinked. Only individuals of recognized noble blood may petition for alliance with the imperial family. Ethan stopped in the center of the chamber. Human blood is usually recognized by its inconvenient habit of leaking. Lieutenant Harris covered his face with one hand. The translator orb above Ethan pulsed and announced, "The human confirms biological legitimacy through fluid loss." A few alien delegates laughed despite themselves. Emperor Aldrin did not. He studied Ethan with the stern stillness of a man deciding whether courage and insanity were merely different uniforms worn by the same impulse. "Why have you interrupted this ceremony?" he asked. Ethan glanced toward Lyra. She stood beside the throne platform, shoulders drawn inward, her long ears lowered beneath her golden hair. The court had spent the last hour examining her as though she were a damaged machine offered at auction. He found that image harder to tolerate than the Emperor's gaze. Because the ceremony is not finished, he said. Chancellor Vaylor stepped forward. The silver filaments in his robes awakened, spreading lines of data across the fabric. It is finished. Every eligible candidate has declined. Then your definition of eligible appears to be defective. A murmur moved through the nobles. Vaylor's narrow face tightened. You possess no territory. I have an apartment on Earth. You command no fleet. I once commanded a maintenance shuttle for 11 minutes. Harris whispered from the delegation. You crashed it. Ethan looked over his shoulder. I landed aggressively. Even Lyra's lips moved with the beginning of a smile. It disappeared quickly, but Ethan saw it. So did the Emperor. Vaylor raised his chin. This is not entertainment, human. I agree. Entertainment usually humiliates volunteers. The hall fell quiet again. This time the silence carried weight. Ethan turned fully toward the throne. Your Majesty, I know I am not what this court expected. I have no dynasty, no trade system, and no heroic chin visible from orbit. Kylan's projected halo flickered as several guests looked toward him. But I heard the herald say the ceremony allows a candidate to choose a member of the royal family and offer service, loyalty, and alliance. It does not say the offer must be profitable. The Emperor's gaze shifted toward the chief archivist. The elderly woman immediately summoned a circular hologram from the floor. Ancient imperial laws unfolded around her in columns of golden script. She searched in silence while the entire court waited. Lyra did not move. She was afraid that if she breathed too deeply, the moment would break and reveal itself as some elaborate joke. The archivist finally looked up. The soldier is correct. Chancellor Vaylor turned sharply. That clause predates the Unification Wars. It remains active, she said. Any sworn defender of the Empire may petition, provided the royal member accepts. Now the attention of the chamber shifted toward Lyra. It struck her with greater force than before. Her pulse quickened and the acoustic field detected it, briefly projecting a medical warning beside her shoulder. She waved the message away, mortified. Ethan climbed the first step of the platform but stopped at a respectful distance. Up close, he could see how hard she was fighting to remain composed. Princess Lyra, he said, his voice quieter now. I do not know what these people expected you to prove today. I only know none of them bothered to ask who you are. Her blue eyes lifted to his. You do not know me either. The hall amplified her voice before it could fade. Ethan nodded. That is true. A few nobles smiled, believing his argument had collapsed. But I know cruelty when I see it. I know courage when someone stands through 14 public insults without throwing a chair. On Earth, that already qualifies as impressive diplomacy. A soft laugh escaped Lyra before she could stop it. This time the entire hall heard. Ethan smiled. I choose you, he said. Not because you are a princess. Not because it gives me power. I choose you because everyone else looked at your silence and decided there was nothing inside it. I think they were too busy hearing themselves. The holographic stars continued their slow orbit. Lyra stared at him, her face pale with disbelief. No one had ever spoken to her without asking for something hidden beneath the words. No one had ever made kindness sound like an act of defiance. And if I refuse? She whispered. Then I return to my delegation. Harris lectures me for 3 hours, and I spend the rest of my life pretending this collar was worth wearing. Harris called from across the hall. 4 hours. Lyra looked toward the nobles who had rejected her, then toward Vaylor, whose calm expression had begun to fracture. Finally, she looked back at Ethan. Her long ears rose slightly. I accept. The ceremonial system responded at once. Light erupted beneath their feet, forming 2 interlocking circles of blue and gold. Above them, ancient machines hidden inside the palace awakened, and a voice older than the Empire declared, Alliance recognized. The entire hall fell silent. Ethan glanced down at the glowing symbols around his boots. Is this normal? Lyra's smile remained small, but it no longer vanished. "No," she said. Not even slightly. The light beneath Ethan and Lyra did not fade when the ceremony ended. It followed them through the palace corridors in thin blue lines, gliding beneath the transparent floor, as though the ancient machinery had decided they required supervision. Courtiers moved aside whenever the glow approached. Some bowed to Lyra. Others stared at Ethan with the expression of people watching a small animal carry an imperial seal in its mouth. "Is it supposed to follow us?" Ethan asked. Lyra glanced down. "No. You say that often. You do unusual things often." I walked into a room. "You challenged 3,000 years of royal law within 8 minutes. It was a very productive walk." Her smile appeared briefly, then retreated when they reached the private wing of the palace. The walls here were quieter, formed from pale living crystal that adjusted its warmth to the emotions of those nearby. As Lyra's anxiety rose, the corridor softened to a calm silver. Ethan noticed and lowered his voice. "Do the walls always know how everyone feels?" "Only in the royal wing." "That sounds inconvenient." "Why?" "Humans depend heavily on pretending we are fine." Service drone drifted toward them carrying 2 silver cups. It scanned Ethan, hesitated, and offered both drinks to Lyra. "The machine does not recognize me," he said. "It recognizes you," she replied. "It simply doubts you should be here." At last, something in the palace agrees with the nobles. Lyra took 1 cup and handed him the other. He drank before asking what it was. The liquid was cold, bitter, and followed by a surprising burst of heat behind his eyes. He stopped walking. "What is this?" "Narathi blossom infusion." "Is it supposed to attack me?" "It improves concentration. I can now concentrate very clearly on regretting it." Her laugh escaped more easily this time. The sound altered the living crystal, sending faint golden patterns across the walls. Lyra noticed and looked away, embarrassed by the visible evidence of her happiness. Ethan pretended not to see. They entered her private laboratory through a door hidden behind a moving mural of the Empire's star systems. The room beyond was enormous, and nothing like the delicate chamber he had expected. Suspended engines rotated inside magnetic rings. Half-built drones rested along illuminated workbenches. A scale model of the capital floated above a circular console, surrounded by thousands of defensive trajectories. Ethan slowly turned beneath the blue-white light. "You built all this?" Lyra folded her hands. "Some of it." "Which part?" "Most of it." A mechanical insect crawled from beneath a panel, scanned Ethan's boot, and struck it with a tiny welding arm. "And that? That is Piri. Piri dislikes me. Piri dislikes everyone." The little machine struck his boot again. Ethan crouched. "We have something in common." Piri emitted an offended chirp and vanished beneath the console. Lyra moved toward the central projection, where a lattice of orbital shields surrounded the capital. Her posture changed when she worked. The timid uncertainty remained, but it no longer controlled her. Her fingers moved through streams of data with quiet precision, separating equations, redirecting power, and expanding models no court scientist had ever seen. "The palace shields are outdated," she said. "They depend on fixed generators. A coordinated strike against 3 relay stations could collapse the entire network." Ethan studied the projection. "Have you told the Defense Council?" Her long ears lowered. "I tried." "What happened?" "Admiral Sorvin said my calculations were too theoretical. Chancellor Vaylor recommended that I focus on ceremonial studies." Ethan's expression sharpened. "Did either of them understand the equations?" Sorvin asked whether the blue lines represented enemy ships. "Do they?" "They represent gravitational stress." "Then I already understand more than he does." She looked at him, uncertain whether he was joking. "That was not difficult," he added. Lyra enlarged another projection. Hundreds of small satellites appeared in orbit, each linked by shifting bands of light. This system would create a mobile quantum barrier. It could move with the threat rather than waiting for impact. Ethan circled the model slowly. He had seen battlefields where seconds determined whether cities survived. What floated before him was not a shy princess's hobby. It was a defense network capable of changing the balance of the empire. "Why keep it here?" he asked. "Because no one wanted it." Her answer was quiet, but it carried the weight of years. Ethan looked toward her. "They did not want to hear it. That is different." Before Lyra could respond, every suspended engine in the laboratory stopped. The lights dimmed. Peary emerged from beneath the console and froze. A red symbol appeared above the orbital model. Unauthorized access detected. Lyra's face lost its color. Someone is inside the system. Data vanished from the projection in rapid sections. Ethan reached for the sidearm he had been required to surrender before the ceremony, remembered it was not there, and picked up a heavy calibration tool instead. Can they steal the designs? Not if I isolate the core. Her hands moved through the controls, but the system resisted. Somewhere beyond the walls, a hidden signal was overriding her commands. Ethan moved toward the door. "Lock this room." "Where are you going?" "To find whoever is trying to rob my future wife before dinner." Lyra stared at him. "Future wife?" He paused. Was that not what the glowing floor meant? It meant formal alliance. Good. I was worried I had skipped several conversations. Despite the alarm, she laughed once. Then the laboratory doors slammed shut by themselves, and Chancellor Vaylor's voice emerged from the ceiling. "Princess Lyra," he said calmly, "step away from the console." Lyra did not step away from the console. Her fingers remained suspended inside the holographic lattice while red warning symbols multiplied around her wrists. Chancellor Vaylor's voice filled the laboratory again, calm and patient, as though he were correcting a child who had touched an expensive ornament. "The defense network contains classified imperial architecture. You are not authorized to modify it without council approval." Ethan tightened his grip on the calibration tool. "Interesting. The person breaking into her laboratory has concerns about authorization." A pause followed. "Sergeant Vale, this matter does not involve you. You interrupted dinner before it began. It is now deeply personal." Lyra glanced toward him, then quickly returned her attention to the console. Streams of stolen data continued vanishing into an encrypted channel hidden beneath the palace network. She opened 3 control layers and severed the first route, but the intruder immediately shifted to another. Whoever was doing this knew her system almost as well as she did. That frightened her more than Vaylor's voice. "He has been watching my work," she whispered. Ethan stepped closer. "Can you stop the transfer?" "Not from here. The signal is passing through the old observatory relay." "Where is that?" 3 levels below the eastern tower." "Good. The doors are locked." "Less good." Peary crawled from beneath the console and struck the sealed door with its welding arm. The tiny machine produced a furious electronic chirp. Ethan pointed at it. "I like this one now." Lyra knelt and opened a maintenance panel beneath the wall. Behind it, bundles of luminous fiber twisted around a narrow service tunnel. The palace drones use these passages. Ethan looked at the opening, then at his shoulders. The palace drones have made selfish architectural choices. There is another route through the ventilation shaft. Humans have a proud military tradition of crawling through places designed for smaller and wiser creatures. Lyra entered first. The shaft carried them through the living walls of the palace, past pulsing conduits and silent chambers filled with ancient machinery. Blue maintenance lights awakened as they moved, revealing carvings older than the Empire. Ethan followed with the calibration tool between his teeth until Lyra looked back. "Is that safe?" "No," he said around the handle. "But it looks professional." Behind them, Peary sealed the entrance and hurried after them on 6 metallic legs. They emerged into an abandoned gallery overlooking the capital. Night had fallen over Valoria. Thousands of towers rose beneath the planetary shield, their surfaces alive with moving advertisements, transit lanes, and artificial gardens drifting between buildings. Far above, defense platforms glided across the stars. For one peaceful second, Lyra forgot the alarm. Then an explosion flashed near the western orbital ring. The palace windows darkened automatically. A second detonation followed, then a third. Emergency sirens rolled across the capital. Ethan stared upward as fragments of a patrol craft burned through the atmosphere. That is not a system malfunction. The laboratory alarm had been a distraction. Across the city, holographic news channels appeared in the sky, reporting the arrival of unidentified warships beyond the lunar perimeter. At the same moment, palace security drones flooded the gallery and aimed their weapons at Ethan. Admiral Sorvin marched behind them in crimson armor, accompanied by guards bearing the silver insignia of Vaylor's office. "Sergeant Vale," he said, "you are under arrest for attempting to steal Imperial defense codes." Ethan looked at Lyra. That accusation arrived impressively prepared. "He did not steal anything," she said. Her voice trembled, but she stepped in front of him. Sorvin barely looked at her. "Princess, the human manipulated your emotional vulnerability to gain access to military systems." "My emotional vulnerability?" Her ears rose sharply. "You rejected these systems 6 months ago. Because they were unstable. You called them decorative mathematics." Sorvin's jaw tightened. Ethan leaned toward Lyra. "That is an excellent insult. Completely meaningless, but excellent." The guards advanced. Lyra opened her palm, and the lights in the gallery vanished. The floor shifted beneath them as hidden gravity plates activated. Sorvin and his soldiers rose helplessly into the air, their boots kicking several centimeters above the ground. Ethan remained standing inside a small field of normal gravity. He looked down at himself. "You planned for this?" "I planned for tedious council meetings." Peary rushed forward and welded Sorvin's ceremonial cape to a floating security drone. The Admiral spun slowly in the darkness while the machine attempted to return to formation. Ethan watched him rotate. "I withdraw every unkind thing I said about Peary." Lyra accessed a wall terminal and traced the stolen signal. The encrypted channel led from her laboratory to the observatory relay, then outward to a vessel beyond the defense perimeter. A second connection appeared beside it, authorized with Chancellor Vaylor's private seal. Her face went still. "He gave them access." "To your designs?" "To the palace shields." The unidentified fleet had not come blindly. Someone inside the capital had shown them where to strike. Ethan examined the tactical display as enemy vessels emerged from folded space in perfect formation. Their first shots targeted the 3 relay stations Lyra had warned the council about. "Your shield prediction was correct," he said. "That is not comforting." "No, but it means your mobile barrier can stop them." "The satellites were never approved." "Are they built?" Lyra hesitated. Behind the public defense network, she opened a hidden orbital map. Hundreds of inactive objects appeared among weather platforms and communication arrays. "Mostly." Ethan smiled despite the sirens. "Princess, I believe mostly is the traditional human measurement for ready." A violent tremor passed through the palace. The planetary shield flickered and darkness spread across half the capital. Sorvin stopped spinning. His face had gone pale. "If the main relays fall, the city will be exposed." Lyra looked at the officers who had ignored her, at the sky burning beyond the glass, and finally at Ethan. For years, speaking before the council had seemed more terrifying than any enemy fleet. Now billions of lives waited beneath technology only she understood. Ethan held out his hand. "Tell me what you need." Lyra took it. "Access to the Imperial command chamber. And how many guards stand between us and it?" Peary chirped eagerly and raised its welding arm. Lyra's mouth curved into a small, determined smile. "Not enough." The route to the Imperial command chamber crossed 3 security zones, 2 suspended bridges, and a corridor currently occupied by 40 armed guards who had been told Ethan was a traitor. Under normal circumstances, this would have required negotiation. Peary had no interest in normal circumstances. The little machine raced ahead, leapt onto the wall, and buried its welding arm inside a control panel. Every door in the corridor opened at once. The guards turned in confusion just as the gravity plates beneath them tilted 90 degrees. Men, weapons, and ceremonial helmets slid sideways into a decorative fountain. Ethan stepped over a floating rifle. "Your palace has excellent fountains." "They were installed for diplomatic receptions," Lyra said. "Then they are finally serving diplomacy." She moved beside him with one hand linked to the palace network through a glowing band around her wrist. Data streamed across her eyes, projecting enemy positions, shield failures, and civilian evacuation routes. Each new report sharpened her expression. The timid princess who had lowered her head before 14 suitors was disappearing beneath the calm precision of the engineer she had always been. They reached the command chamber as the second planetary relay collapsed. The doors opened onto chaos. Officers shouted across circular tactical platforms while holographic warships burned above them. Emperor Aldrin stood at the central table in battle armor, his white ceremonial robes discarded. Seraphine and Malus coordinated evacuation fleets from opposite stations. Chancellor Vaylor was nowhere in sight. Admiral Sorvin stumbled in behind Ethan, his cape still welded to a damaged security drone. "Arrest them," he shouted. The drone attempted to rise and pulled him backward. The Emperor looked from Sorvin to Lyra. "Explain." Lyra stopped beneath the towering projection of Valoria. For a moment, every eye in the chamber turned toward her, and the old fear tightened around her throat. She could almost hear the laughter from the ceremony. Too quiet, too weak, unfit to inspire confidence. Then Ethan leaned closer. "Imagine they are all maintenance drones." She glanced at the officers. "That is insulting to the drones," she whispered. "Excellent. You are ready." Lyra raised her hand. The tactical projection changed. The Empire's failing shield vanished, replaced by a lattice of hundreds of dormant satellites hidden across orbit. "The enemy is targeting fixed relays because someone gave them our defense architecture," she said. Her voice began softly, but the chamber's acoustic system carried every word. "The primary shield will fail within 9 minutes. My mobile quantum network can replace it." Sorvin tore his cape free. "That system was never tested. It was tested 43 times. In simulation. In simulations you refuse to review." A few officers looked away. The Emperor studied the satellites. "Can it protect the capital?" "Yes. But the activation must occur from the command core, and the satellites require a synchronized ignition signal." "How long?" 7 minutes. A blast struck the outer shield. The entire chamber shook, sending several holographic vessels spinning through the air. Ethan checked the tactical display. "We appear to have 9 minutes before catastrophe. That leaves 2 minutes for speeches." Aldrin's mouth almost moved. "Do it." Lyra stepped onto the command platform. The system scanned her, then rejected access. Royal authority restricted. Vaylor had locked her out. His face appeared above the chamber in a silver hologram. Behind him stood the observatory relay and 3 masked soldiers. "You were always more dangerous than your sisters," he said. "Not because you desired power, but because you could make old power unnecessary." Lyra's hands tightened. Vaylor continued. "The invading fleet will remove Aldrin. The remaining houses will accept a council government. Your designs will ensure our victory afterward." "You humiliated her to keep her silent," Ethan said. "I merely allowed the court to see what it already believed." Lyra looked toward the projection of the burning city. "And you believed I would remain afraid?" "I knew you would." For years that sentence might have destroyed her. Now she placed both hands on the command core. "I am afraid," she said. "I am simply working anyway." She forced the system open. Blue light exploded across the chamber. The palace reactors groaned as energy surged upward through the towers. In orbit, the first satellite awakened, then another, then hundreds more. They unfolded like metallic flowers against the darkness, linking themselves with threads of quantum light. The enemy fleet fired. A wall of energy curved across the atmosphere just before the bombardment reached the capital. Space flashed white. The impact rolled around the planet, shaking mountains and sending auroras across the night sky. But the barrier held. A cheer rose from the officers. "Not yet," Lyra said. The satellites began moving. Instead of waiting for the next attack, they formed narrow corridors through the enemy formation. Lyra redirected gravitational fields around their engines, trapping warships inside folding pockets of distorted space. Vessels collided with their own sensor echoes. Others lost propulsion and drifted harmlessly toward the lunar perimeter. Ethan stared at the display. "You turned the shield into a weapon. A defensive redirection system. You threw their fleet into invisible holes. That is the simplified explanation. I prefer it." Vaylor's hologram flickered. His calm expression finally broke. "You cannot control this alone." Lyra expanded the network. "I never needed to." She opened command access to every defense officer in the chamber, distributing control instead of keeping it for herself. The system stabilized immediately. Seraphine directed the eastern satellites. Malus protected evacuation lanes. Even Sorvin, after one ashamed pause, took control of the northern grid. Ethan led a strike team to the observatory. They found Vaylor attempting to escape through a diplomatic shuttle, only to discover Peary had welded its landing clamps to the platform. The Chancellor stared at the tiny machine. Peary struck his boot. When Ethan returned to the command chamber, dawn was breaking over Valoria. The final enemy vessel had surrendered. The city remained standing beneath a shield of Lyra's creation. The Emperor approached his youngest daughter slowly. "I should have listened," he said. Lyra's ears lowered, though not from shame. "Yes," she replied. Ethan coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. Aldrin looked at him. "Something amusing, Sergeant?" "No, Your Majesty. I was expressing aggressive respiratory agreement." 3 days after the battle, Valoria's skies were clear again. Repair drones moved between the towers like flocks of silver birds, sealing shattered windows and rebuilding transit bridges with threads of liquid metal. Above the capital, Lyra's satellites remained in orbit, no longer dormant secrets hidden among weather stations, but the heart of a new defense system protecting every world in the Empire. Citizens had begun calling them the Princess's Crown. Lyra disliked the name because crowns, in her experience, usually required uncomfortable ceremonies. Unfortunately, the Empire had prepared another one. The Hall of Constellations had been restored before several residential districts, a decision Ethan considered an excellent summary of imperial priorities. The same nobles who had laughed during the choosing ceremony now stood beneath the holographic stars with solemn expressions and carefully prepared apologies. Prince Kalen's artificial halo had been repaired, though it flickered whenever he became nervous, making him look like a malfunctioning religious symbol. Lyra entered beside Ethan. This time she did not lower her head. She wore no ceremonial gown. Instead, she had chosen a white engineering uniform beneath a light mantle bearing the royal crest. Her golden hair fell freely over her shoulders, and her long pointed ears remained upright even when thousands of eyes turned toward her. Ethan walked at her side in the same dark blue uniform he had worn before, though someone had added medals to it while he was asleep. "I feel heavier," he whispered. "That is because you are wearing 12 decorations." I performed approximately 3 decorated actions. The Empire is generous with metal. It could have given me a better collar. Lyra smiled without hiding it. At the center of the hall, Chancellor Vaylor and his conspirators stood inside a transparent containment field. The old advisors who had supported him had been removed from office, while the enemy fleet's surviving commanders had revealed the full agreement. Vaylor had promised them access to imperial territory in exchange for help overthrowing Aldrin. He had believed he could control them afterward using Lyra's technology. Instead, Peary had been awarded a military commendation for preventing his escape. The little machine now sat on a velvet cushion beside the throne, striking the metal with its welding arm. The Emperor rose. "Before this court," he said, "I acknowledge that pride nearly destroyed what wisdom could have saved. Princess Lyra warned us of weakness in our defenses. We dismissed her. She offered us a solution. We ignored it. When the Empire was attacked, she protected those who had failed her." The nobles lowered their heads. Aldrin turned toward his daughter. You will lead the new Imperial Science and Defense Council with authority independent of the noble houses. Applause filled the chamber. Lyra flinched at the sound, then steadied herself. The old instinct to disappear had not vanished. Courage, she had learned, was not the absence of fear. It was the decision that fear would no longer be allowed to make every choice. She stepped forward. I accept, she said, and her voice carried clearly without assistance from the acoustic system. But the council will not belong only to nobles or officers. Engineers, pilots, civilian researchers, and representatives from the outer colonies will have equal seats. A shocked murmur moved through the court. Ethan leaned toward Harris. That sounds dangerously reasonable. Harris nodded. They may need time to recover. One by one, the former suitors approached Lyra. Some apologized sincerely. Others spoke with the strained politeness of men who had recently discovered that the quiet woman they rejected controlled the planetary shield network. Prince Kalen bowed deepest. I misjudged you, he said. Yes, Lyra replied. His halo flickered. I hope you may someday forgive my words. I already have. Relief softened his face. Peary has not. The little machine chirped from the throne and raised its welding arm. Kalen retreated immediately. When the formal proceedings ended, Emperor Aldrin called Ethan forward. The hall became silent again, though this silence no longer felt cruel. You entered this palace without title or fortune, Aldrin said. You challenged our laws, insulted several noble houses, disobeyed military orders, escaped arrest, and entered a restricted command chamber. Ethan considered this. When listed together, it sounds less heroic. Yet without you, my daughter may never have stepped forward. Lyra looked at Ethan. I would have eventually. He smiled. Of course. Possibly after several years. Still counts. The Emperor offered Ethan a ceremonial blade and the title of Imperial Protector. Ethan accepted the blade, examined the jeweled handle, and asked whether the position included better housing. Half the court laughed before realizing he was serious. Later, when the crowds had gone and the holographic stars dimmed, Lyra and Ethan stood alone on the western balcony. The same sky once filled with suitors' ships now held construction vessels, patrol craft, and the slow-moving lights of her satellite network. I thought you chose me because you felt sorry for me, Lyra said. I was angry for you, Ethan replied. That is different. And now? He leaned against the crystal railing. Now I know you build planetary shields, manipulate gravity, and maintain a machine that threatens aristocrats. I am deeply impressed. She looked toward him. The alliance ceremony did not require marriage. I have been informed, repeatedly, by 7 legal advisors and 1 extremely concerned priest. Lyra laughed, and the living crystal beneath their hands glowed gold. Ethan became more serious. I meant what I said in the hall. I chose you before I knew what you could do, but I would like to stay because of who you are. Her ears rose slightly. Even if I remain quiet? Especially then, I speak enough for several people. That is true. And you are becoming dangerously skilled at insulting me. I had an excellent teacher. She placed her hand in his. Above them, hundreds of satellites shifted together, forming a luminous arc across the night. The Empire would remember the battle as the day the shy princess saved the capital. Lyra would remember something smaller, the moment she finally understood that being seen by one compassionate person had helped her learn to see herself. Far below, the city lights brightened as power returned, district by district. Peary crawled onto the balcony, struck Ethan's boot once, and settled between them. Ethan looked down. Does this mean it accepts me? Lyra watched the machine raise its welding arm again. I would not move.